The north wind howls across the fjords, and the icy sea gleams beneath a pale sun. The year is somewhere in the 9th century, a time when Europe trembles at the name of the Northmen. The Vikings, forged in hardship and hardened by cold, push their longships farther each season, seeking silver, land, and glory. From the coasts of Britain to the gates of Byzantium, their oars carve through water like blades through fate. Yet far beyond their maps, across thousands of miles of uncharted ocean, another kind of warrior lives by a very different code. On the islands of Japan, the rising sun shines on a people whose lives are bound by honor, discipline, and the whisper of the sword, the samurai. Two worlds so distant that neither knows the other exists, and yet both share a heartbeat that echoes the same rhythm of battle and pride. The Vikings come from the rugged lands of Scandinavia, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Their gods demand courage, and their world is shaped by sea and stone. To them, the ocean is not a boundary but a road. They sail on sleek longships built for both trade and terror, guided by sunstones and stars. In their mythology, the sea connects the realms of gods and men. It is a path to glory and a test of fate. Their culture thrives on exploration, driven by necessity, ambition, and a restless spirit that refuses to stay still. The longhouses of their villages echo with stories of raids on distant monasteries, of treasures won and lost, and of heroes who carved their names into the sagas that would outlast them all. Meanwhile, on the far side of the world, Japan is entering its Heian era, a period of elegance and order, poetry and ceremony, but beneath that surface lies a growing undercurrent of militarization. Provincial governors begin to rely on armed retainers to protect their estates and enforce their rule. From this crucible emerges the samurai, warriors who serve their lords with absolute loyalty, trained from youth in the arts of archery, swordsmanship, and horsemanship. Their code, the forerunner of Bushido, prizes honor above life. Where the Viking sees destiny in conquest, the samurai sees virtue in discipline. The Viking's fury is a storm, the samurai's resolve is a mountain. Both stand unyielding before death, bound by a belief that the manner of dying defines the worth of living. It is almost inconceivable that these two worlds could ever meet. Between them lies the expanse of the Eurasian continent, vast deserts, endless steppes, and the labyrinthine trade routes of the Silk Road. Yet history has a way of weaving improbable connections. As the Vikings expand eastward through the rivers of what is now Russia, they become known as the Rus, establishing trade networks that reach the Byzantine Empire and the Caliphate of Baghdad. They trade furs, slaves, and amber for silks, spices, and silver dirhams. Some of these silver coins, stamped with Arabic script, have been found buried deep in Scandinavian soil, proof of contact with worlds once thought unreachable. To the east, caravans carry Chinese silks through Central Asia, and Arab merchants whisper tales of strange, fair-haired traders who come from lands beyond the northern seas. In turn, the Vikings hear stories of lands rich in gold and wisdom beyond the sunrise. Could these tales have kindled the imagination of a few daring souls? Could a ship, driven off course by storm or curiosity, have reached farther east than any chronicler recorded? The possibility hovers like mist over the ocean, unproven yet irresistible. As centuries pass, the world grows smaller through trade and rumor. The Silk Road is not a single path but a web connecting the extremes of the known world. From the cold harbors of Burka and Hedeby, goods and ideas travel east through Novgorod and Kiev, down the Dnieper River to the Black Sea, and onward to Constantinople, Miklagard, as the Norse call it. There, Vikings serve as the Varangian Guard, elite mercenaries sworn to the Byzantine Emperor. Some travel even further, joining expeditions that touch the edges of Persia, India, and perhaps the lands beyond. At the same time, ships from China and Korea sail the seas near Japan, bringing goods, envoys, and sometimes pirates. Somewhere, in the swirling mists of maritime legend, these currents might have crossed. The contrast between the Viking and the samurai is almost poetic. One is a wanderer, always in motion, seeking fortune in distant lands. The other is rooted, tied to soil and lord, guarding the honor of his name and family. The Viking worships Odin, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom and hung upon the world tree to gain knowledge. The samurai reveres his ancestors and seeks enlightenment through discipline and duty. Both believe in a kind of immortality, the Norseman through the glory of Valhalla, the samurai through the perfection of loyalty. Though separated by thousands of miles and entirely different languages, both understand that courage is the truest measure of a man. This is where our story begins, not in a known battle or a written chronicle, but in the possibility that legends once overlapped. Imagine a longship caught in the fury of a Pacific typhoon, its mast shattered, its crew battered by wind and rain. Days later, it drifts toward the strange green coastlines of the Japanese archipelago. On shore, watchful eyes of armored riders gleam beneath the crests of their helmets. Neither side knows what to make of the other. In one hand, a curved blade forged with divine precision. In the other, a heavy axe that has tasted kings. Two worlds stare across the waves, unaware that this fleeting encounter, true or imagined, will echo through the centuries as one of history's greatest what-ifs. For now, they are still strangers, two distant fires burning at opposite ends of the earth. But the wind is shifting, and destiny is stirring. Somewhere between myth and memory, the ocean prepares to bring them together. And as the drums of the north fade into the silence of the east, a single question remains, heavy with wonder and foreboding. What would happen when the Vikings met the samurai? As the smoke of the coming storm begins to gather, the story moves from the ruined fields of Carchemish to the grand chessboard of ancient geopolitics. The world at the dawn of the 6th century BC was a fragile and shifting landscape of power, ambition, and desperation. The Assyrian Empire, which for 3 centuries had dominated the Near East with unmatched brutality and administrative skill, was now a dying giant. Its heartlands had been ravaged by rebellion and invasion, its royal cities reduced to smoldering ruins. Nineveh had fallen in 612 BCE, and with it collapsed the illusion of Assyrian invincibility. The once feared armies of Ashur were now scattered fragments of a dying civilization, clinging to survival along the upper Euphrates. Yet even in their ruin, the Assyrians refused to vanish quietly. In their hour of desperation, they turned to the one ally who still possessed the wealth and might to challenge Babylon's rising power, Egypt. To the south, Pharaoh Necho II watched these events unfold with a calculating mind. Egypt had once ruled from the Nile to the Euphrates, but centuries of decline had reduced its sphere of influence to the homeland. The fall of Assyria, however, presented both a threat and an opportunity. If Babylon were allowed to dominate the Near East, Egyptian trade routes to the Levant would be severed, and its prestige as an ancient superpower would be lost forever. Thus Necho decided to act, not out of loyalty to Assyria, but to secure his own empire's survival. He assembled one of the largest Egyptian expeditionary forces of the late period, divisions of infantry, chariots, mercenaries from the Aegean, and auxiliary units drawn from Canaanite vassal states. The army set forth along the coastal road of the Levant, following the same paths once marched by Thutmose and Ramses centuries before. To the people of the Near East, it must have seemed as though the ghosts of Egypt's imperial past had returned to claim their due. Meanwhile, to the east, the Babylonians were rising under the leadership of the formidable Nabopolassar and his son, the young and brilliant Nebuchadnezzar II. The Babylonians had not forgotten their own centuries of subjugation under Assyria. Every fortress captured, every city burned, was not merely a victory of strategy but an act of vengeance. Yet unlike the Assyrians, whose empire had been built upon terror and coercion, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar promised order and restoration, or so it claimed. The young prince was a man forged in both intellect and ambition, deeply aware that his father's rebellion against Assyria had birthed a fragile new empire. To secure it, he needed not merely to win battles, but to annihilate any power that could challenge Babylon's supremacy. The alliance of Egypt and the remnants of Assyria posed such a threat, and Carchemish would become the proving ground of Nebuchadnezzar's destiny. The world trembled under the shifting weight of empires. The alliances that had once stabilized the Near East were now fractured. Traders and diplomats spoke in hushed tones of omens, eclipses, droughts, and earthquakes that seemed to mirror the collapse of political order. Ordinary people, caught between armies, fled from the path of destruction, their caravans trailing across the deserts. The roads that once carried gold, ivory, and lapis lazuli now carried refugees and soldiers. This crumbling world order is captured not as a dry historical backdrop but as a living, breathing tragedy where kings fought not for conquest but for the illusion that they could halt the tide of time. Through cinematic storytelling, the documentary now contrasts the motivations and emotions of its three central figures, Necho, Nabopolassar, and Nebuchadnezzar. Necho is portrayed as a proud but aging monarch, a man haunted by Egypt's lost glory and desperate to reclaim it. Nabopolassar, nearing the end of his life, is the revolutionary who has already achieved what few dared. He has broken the Assyrian yoke. But it is his son Nebuchadnezzar who embodies the hunger of a new generation, disciplined, innovative, and ruthless. His army is no longer a loose confederation of tribal levies but a professional force honed through years of campaigning. Engineers construct siege engines with mathematical precision. Officers plan assaults with cold calculation. To them, Carchemish is not a fortress to fear, but a stepping stone to empire. The section heightens emotional tension as the Egyptian columns approach from the south and the Babylonian armies advance from the east. Messengers gallop through the dust, bearing urgent news. The enemy is on the move. The remaining Assyrian generals within Carchemish fortify the walls, sending desperate pleas for help that may arrive too late. The air is heavy with foreboding. Both sides know that this coming battle will not merely determine the fate of a city but decide who will rule the ancient world. The armies are vast, but beneath their grandeur lies fragility, soldiers exhausted from years of continuous war, kings haunted by doubt, empires held together by sheer will. As the section draws to its close, the narration deepens to emphasize the tragic inevitability of history. The Assyrians cling to the illusion of revival, unaware that they are already extinct. Egypt marches to preserve its influence, yet its campaign will mark the beginning of its irreversible decline. And Babylon, ascending in confidence, cannot yet see the weight of empire that will one day crush it as well. The narrator's tone becomes somber. All roads, all ambitions, all destinies now converge on a single river, the Euphrates, where Carchemish waits in silence. The section ends with the image of the two armies finally glimpsing each other across the wide waters of the river, their banners rippling in the desert wind. The world holds its breath, suspended between the dying light of one age and the first shadows of the next. Weeks passed as the stranded Vikings repaired what remained of their ship, unaware that their presence had already drawn the attention of a local daimyo. To him, the sight of foreign warriors on his shores was both threat and omen. Rumors spread through nearby villages of red-haired giants who wielded thunder and carried axes that could cleave helmets in two. In a land bound by honor and order, such chaos could not be tolerated. A message was sent to a nearby garrison. Soon, a detachment of samurai was dispatched to investigate, armored, disciplined, and led by a veteran commander named Takeda Masanobu. He was no stranger to conflict but wary of unnecessary bloodshed. Yet when his scouts reported that the strangers had built fortifications and armed themselves, he knew diplomacy would be short-lived. If they come in peace, he told his men, we will show restraint. If they come for war, we will end it swiftly. On the Viking side, Eiríkur saw the same storm rising. His men, starving and exhausted, refused to surrender their weapons. We are not beggars, he growled, we are warriors. That pride would seal their fate. When the samurai emissaries approached the camp, the meeting was tense, 2 languages, 2 codes, and no bridge between them. Misunderstanding bred fear. Fear gave birth to violence. An arrow flew, no one would later remember who fired first, and the fragile peace shattered. The Vikings roared to arms, forming a shield wall, while the samurai advanced in perfect formation, their armor glinting beneath gathering thunderclouds. The storm broke as steel met steel, and the rain began to fall. The stage was set. Nature, fate, and human pride had conspired to bring 2 warrior worlds to the edge of destruction. The siege reaches its breaking point. Babylonian siege engines roll forward, their massive stones pounding the walls of Carchemish. The defenders, a desperate mix of Egyptians and Assyrian remnants, fight with fury, knowing this is their last stand. Smoke rises over the Euphrates as catapults hurl flaming missiles, and Nebuchadnezzar's troops tighten their noose around the city. The sound of war drums drowns out all else. Inside the walls, panic spreads. Egyptian chariots burst from the gates in a final counterattack, cutting through the Babylonian ranks with desperate courage. For a fleeting moment, it seems they might turn the tide. But Nebuchadnezzar unleashes his reserves, fresh, disciplined troops who encircle the defenders. The chariots crash against the shield walls and crumble. Hope turns to horror. With a thunderous explosion, Babylonian sappers bring down a section of the wall. Through the breach, soldiers pour in, cutting their way through the streets. The defenders fight from rooftops and alleys, but their lines collapse under the weight of Babylon's assault. The Euphrates runs red with the blood of warriors and civilians alike. By noon, the city burns. Pharaoh Necho's army retreats, shattered and broken. Nebuchadnezzar walks through the ruins, his victory complete. The Assyrian capital that once ruled the Near East is gone, and Egypt's influence in Mesopotamia ends forever. The narrator's voice closes with quiet finality. Carchemish did not merely fall. An entire world ended with it. By dawn, the storm had faded, leaving the battlefield silent beneath a pale sky. The beach was strewn with wreckage, shattered shields, torn banners, and lifeless warriors from both sides. The air was thick with salt and smoke, the scent of death and rain mingling as gulls circled overhead. Neither the Vikings nor the samurai had won. The gods and ancestors alike had taken their due. Iraqer's remaining crew moved among the fallen in stunned quiet, gathering the bodies of their brothers. Across the field, the surviving samurai did the same. There were no cries of triumph, only the soft sound of wet sand beneath their feet. When the Norse began to bury their dead, the samurai paused. Then wordlessly they helped. Together, they raised mounds of earth and stone, marking graves with runes and wooden tablets. That day, enemies became mourners. The living honored the fallen, regardless of banner or tongue. Beneath the same gray sky, they shared a silence deeper than language. To the samurai, these foreigners were brave, reckless perhaps, but worthy. To the Vikings, these men were fierce and unyielding, bound by a code they could almost understand. When night fell, fires burned once more, funeral flames instead of war's fury. The sea reflected their light as prayers and songs rose, half heard and half understood. In that brief peace, a strange unity formed, born not from alliance, but from respect. By the next dawn, only ashes remained. The survivors vanished into history, some dying on foreign soil, others lost to the waves. Yet their graves endured, humble and nameless, hidden by the tide. The sea had claimed their bodies, but not their story. Centuries passed, and the storm's memory faded into myth. Yet fragments of the tale endured, in whispered songs, forgotten scrolls, and coastal legends. In Japan, fishermen spoke of red-haired demons who arrived on waves of thunder. In the north, sagas told of warriors who sailed beyond the dawn and never returned. The truth was buried by time, but the echoes never vanished. Historians still debate whether Vikings ever reached the shores of Japan. Fragments of ironwork and woven cloth hint at contact, but nothing conclusive remains. Perhaps it was chance, perhaps destiny, but their meeting symbolizes more than a battle. It speaks to humanity's relentless drive to explore, to test the boundaries of the known world. Both the Vikings and the samurai worshipped courage and fate. Each believed that death in honor was a kind of immortality. Their clash, real or imagined, became a mirror of human ambition, the need to conquer not just lands, but the limits of imagination itself. The story endures because it reminds us that history's greatest encounters are not always recorded. They live in the space between what was and what might have been. The sea that once divided east and west became, in this legend, their meeting ground, a bridge of fate and mystery. As waves roll endlessly upon that forgotten shore, we are left with one image, a Viking and a samurai standing side by side, staring toward the horizon. Their swords are lowered, their war is done. What remains is understanding, a silent tribute to every explorer, warrior, and dreamer who ever dared to reach beyond their world. The sea keeps their secret, but the legend remains. In the meeting of storm and steel, two worlds became one story.